fast, more than expected. Welcome to Google. I'm extremely honored to have both of you here. I admire strongly what you've done in the last few years. Luz is a very close friend of mine, but then I can call you friend as well.
Absolutely.
It's family when I go to the cinema every time. And thanks for coming to Google and our colleagues here. I would start maybe with a short introduction, but you, of course, are best placed to say what you do best. Butheina worked in a TV and radio station. You're also a producer of a short documentary that is called Letter to Palestine. They won a local award. You're part of many jury around also Europe, including the Sarajevo Film Festival. You were there recently, if I'm not wrong. And you're the co-founder of Cinema Akil, which is kind of like the reason why we're here today together. And last week you won an award from Graz, if I'm not wrong, and the Emirates Woman Award for Art and Culture in 2019.
Thank you.
So first of all, congratulations for that.
Thank you.
Quick introduction about Luz. She's Deputy Director at the Cinema Akil, creator of Alternativo Latino. That is the UAE first Latin American film festival. Has more than 10 years of experience in media and production, and as well sits on the jury of the 10th Zayed University Middle East Film Festival. Big things. I work at Google. We would like maybe to know a little bit more about you, starting maybe from you, Butheina. You said in an interview that that your love for cinema started at birth. And some of your earliest memories are actually visiting independent cinemas in Bahrain. Can you tell us a little bit more about this passion and how it developed and how it affected your life?
I mean, I don't know about birth because it took a little bit of time to get access to film living here in the UAE. I was born in Bahrain, yes, but spent a lot of my childhood here, old school Dubai, and that was kind of the foundation of my cinema experience. And a lot of that kind of spilled over to the way that we ended up building the cinema. And I can talk a little bit more about that. But it's very hard for me to identify that moment, that very specific moment where I fell in love with the film, where there wasn't this, this sort of, Cinema Paradiso moment where I'm like sitting in a theater and it was beautiful. I went to a lot of standalone cinemas here, Nasser Cinema. If anybody's, an old school Dubaian, you would remember that it burned down mysteriously and still remains as like a sort of a gaping hole in Bar Dubai. Bahrain, same thing, a lot of standalone cinemas that sort of formed my cinematic experience, going to the darkness and, and being part of that magic. But I think, I've always loved the idea. I've been inflicted with this sort of condition of wanderlust. I've always wanted to exist in other spaces and live other lives and be other people and kind of shapeshift. And cinema has a very powerful way of doing that. And I've always gravitated towards it. And I mean, some of my earliest memories of watching films was, my dad used to spend a lot of time, he was in finance and, he would go to the States and come back and he would go to CompUSA, if anybody remembers that. And, and go to
Anybody remembers that?
CompUSA, it's like Radio Shack. It's like this relic of the past, and where they'd buy, computers, back in the 90s. And there was a discount rack where they had, the laser discs, if you remember those. That was a very short-lived technology prior to the DVD. And he would just pick up a bunch of those and bring them back to Dubai. And we had a laser disc player. And I thought that was really cool because none of my other friends had them. And, it would be like the discount rack. So you'd have everything from Texas Chainsaw Massacre to Lawrence of Arabia to Looney Tunes to random other titles, and that would be what I would watch at the time. And that's kind of what got me in the habit of curating my own viewing. And then obviously that grew and I chased films around, DVD ladies on Sheikh Zayed Road, Star movies.
Everyone
you remember those movie channels on satellite television and and then later pay TV. And then I spent time in North America and, really got into the habit of going to, art houses and, discovering other forms of films, and spent time at Blockbuster, just, in certain specific shelves and, and really honed in, as a broke student, on my love for exploring different kinds of movies.
So there was a mix between family, your father bringing this,
entertainment.
Let's say DVD 1.0 type of thing at home. And obviously, also bring, growing up, New York, and you said in the States, going on your own there. How about you, Luz? Like, what was your experience, and like, how did you develop this passion for movies, and how did you two came to meet each other?
For me, it was a little bit of a different experience, just because I was born and raised in South America. So in Colombia, I have two older brothers who are a lot older than me, and they used to watch quite a lot of film. And I remember me being really interested in what they were kind of looking at and what they were watching. And I remember the first film that I ever watched in the cinema was Lion King, and I will never forget that. I cried the whole way, and it was a very magical experience for me. And then moving on from there, actually acting is what got me interested in film and producing. When I came here and I went to university, I went to the American University of Sharjah. And when I was in uni, one of the things is that I acted on a lot of films that students were making. And the film professor in AUS used to recommend me as an actress to kids that were doing film. And I fell in love with kind of the process of filmmaking in the sense of actually putting together a film. And so when I graduated, I started working for the BBC. I was a fixer for a few of their shows, and I just loved the production aspect of it. And I worked in production for a few years after that. So that's how I got interested in kind of filmmaking and photography and cinematography and so on. And then I met Butheina. We've known each other for maybe 7-8 years.
Yeah, we worked together on a fundraiser.
Yeah,
that was the beginning of the meeting.
Yeah, I used to have a charity that was called Flea for Charity, and we used to do flea markets for charity, and we used to do different fundraising events. And I was doing one for Nepal during the earthquake. And Butheina got in touch with us and said, I want to show this Nepalese film. And what do you think if people, the entrance fee to watch the film is a donation for Nepal? And this was our first collaboration together. And then fast forward a couple of years later, maybe, or a year and so after, I was looking for a new opportunity. I was looking for a new venture to kind of expand my horizons. And then we met, and, we talked about Cinema Akil, and I did my first pop-up for Cinema Akil, which was Sikka Art Fair, almost 4 years ago. And the rest is history.
And she literally had the worst tech setup to deal with.
Yes,
it was thrown right in the pit of darkness. We were in Fahidi, a historical district. We were taking over a courtyard, and we had just spoken that we were going to do this, about and this is only when we were doing our pop-up. So Cinema Akil, as you know, or you might not know, started off for 4 years as a non-fixed place. It was a nomadic, roving, iterant cinema that would shape-shift every single time we would take over a space. So we were taking over everything from, courtyards to gallery. Our very first one was a small gallery in Al-Quoz, which now sits right across the street from where we are right now. And we were taking over, at that time, a courtyard in Fahidi district, and, showing short films from the Gulf. And this was Luz's first, project running a pop-up. And, our tech partner was a bit of a disaster. And, everything that we said, we, specified in the tech writer, and the kind of equipment we wanted did not happen. It went wrong. And the projector combusted.
my first experience of my first screening at Cinema Akil, I remember we were doing this Emirati feature film. And the film starts, and we're worried about the spotlight that is at the audience. And I'm looking for somebody to turn the spotlight off. And the next thing you know, literally the projector overheats and it goes off and there is no movie. And I was just so it was...
she literally followed us into the dark.
Yeah, it was...
And you know what? This leads actually to my next question, which is, Cinema Akil is the only independent cinema in the Middle East. And you said you started in 2014 as a pop-up, and then you opened up in September 2018 in Al Sharqal. Can you take us a little bit back in history, also through your ugliest moments? You were saying before, like, we had very ugly moments.
How much time do we have?
We have some time until people leave. And more about, like, what are the values that really, like, this cinema stands for?
I mean, look, I can take you back to sort of the the crux of the matter. There was this, when I came back from Toronto, I started doing independently, organizing different screenings all over the city. This was at the time when, Dubai's sort of heydays with, where of the culture, the growth of the cultural scene. What is seen now is the cultural, the beginning of the cultural scene, which was about 2008. 2003, I left. 2008, there were a lot of galleries and, a lot of different pop-ups happening all over the city. If you remember, Shelter was taking shape. There were all these different community centers that, hadn't really existed in that form at that time. And I started independently sort of, becoming interested in showcasing these films, from my own collection, collaborating very informally with different community groups to show films, in different spaces. And I've always had this idea of trying to bring people together around, the language of cinema, around these films that you couldn't find anywhere. But then that got shelved somewhere. I left the country, went to New York, spent a couple of years there, spent a lot of my time at the Film Forum, at Angelica, and all these different spaces, and then came back and, really thought that this was the time that Dubai, had the real kind of, appetite and moment and maturity stage to absorb something like this, and started, with a test pilot of a itinerant cinema in a gallery called the Third Line Gallery, which now became our neighbor down the street on Lane 1. But they had a very small space, a very informal kind of setting, warehouse. We put a bunch of beanbags, Manouche Street was the concession stand. Yeah. And, we showed everything from Pablo Larraín's No to Hirokazu Koreeda's Like Father, Like Son to Alfred Hitchcock's Dial M for Murder, like the whole gamut. We were just like, we're going to test this out, And, and I ran a bunch of surveys and started to see what kind of, what could happen from that. And that was really the seed. This was July 2014. And then about a year later, we different things happened, market outside the box, and I was trying different things. And then, we connected and decided to really grow this pop-up thing and not really fixate in parallel, on opening the space. We wanted to sort of do both at the same time. What started off as an afterthought or sort of a test period became the core business, became the way that we would learn and collect information. So, there's a lot of different pop-ups we can talk about, different experiences. Maybe, like the Cynic concert was one of our highlights. Yeah. A 4-person black box in a gallery in Flag Island in Sharjah was maybe, one of our lowlights.
What I'm very curious about is, you also, in terms of programming, and, you kind of like need to fit into a very interesting niche and some sort of like, customers that not necessarily go to, or they do, but, they're also interested in coming to your cinema that, is not necessarily like a regular multiplex cinema.
Yeah.
I'm really curious to know, like, how do you attract these users and what's unique about the space?
Well, I think, going back to the pop-ups and how we started, I do think that the experiment of doing the pop-ups or starting Cinema Akil as a nomadic traveling cinema really became also simultaneously and non-intentionally, in a way, it became the longest kind of marketing campaign for the space. Because at the same time, it was through these experiments of taking over different spaces in different cities that allowed us to expose ourselves to very different audiences. And at the same time, it also, when it came time to open the space, people were already familiar with the name of Cinema Akil. So it made it easier for people to understand what we were trying to do. Although I do feel like we're still doing quite a bit of an educational kind of journey in the sense of we're still trying to show and test the audiences here in Dubai and in Abu Dhabi and wherever we are. But I do think that the appeal is on the fact that a lot of people have followed our journey, and we do have kind of a group of cinephiles and people who are genuinely very passionate about alternative and independent cinema that have followed us from the moment that we used to do, our pop-ups at A4 Space, which was a 60-seater cinema in Al Serkal Avenue, and now it just translated into those people that come to watch almost every single film on Cinema Akil.
But I think the one thing that I'm going to add to that is, I think there's definitely that sort of shifting community, and being kind of a linchpin for a certain set of values, and that's kind of what you were asking is about what it is fundamentally. This is something we've been thinking about a lot in the past month because we celebrated our first year as an actual fixed space. Thanks, so we're very happy. Thank you so much. And it is a time that we're spending thinking about what it is that actually this brings to the city, other than the films that we show, and that's fundamentally always going to be our core focus, and that's the pudding, But in a city like Dubai, where you have all these impossibilities, the amalgamation of the bazaar, the ski slopes in the desert, and the lions in the cars, and the peacocks on the street, and all the other stuff that happens, what does it mean to build an art house inside a warehouse in Al-Quoz, and why do people come? Like, what is the thing that actually people culminate around? And I think it's a lot of different things, but I think fundamentally it's a chance to leave your isolation. It's a chance to put, to put your shoulders down, to connect with other people, to, go through the shared experience of, not only laughing together, because you do that in a lot of multiplexes, but also reflect together. There's an idea about, sort of walking, and that's why we wanted a home. We wanted to put a roof over our heads because we wanted people to not just see those films, we wanted them to have the opportunities to interact with each other and then come out of the cinema and really carry through what the films are doing, and really have this moment to, reflect a certain kind of awakening, not just a surrender. Because I think the thing with the movie going experience is that it's been sort of tarnished with this idea of of almost inherent escapism. And that's not what we're trying to do. You may escape in some moments, but I think ultimately it's actually, a growth, source, and it's something that raises your consciousness. And that's what brings people to our doors.
Yeah, and let's say that, in order to give this type of experience to people, programming also is very important. And what I notice is that female filmmakers and female voices are strongly represented in your movies. Can you explain why it's important now in the Middle East and your point of view on this, especially coming from two women?
Yeah, I mean, Luz has been at the forefront of the discussion of our female voice.
Yes. I mean, I think that overall our programming has been very focused on not only female filmmakers, but also female stories overall. We have done several programs that focus on women, and not only under contemporary Arab cinema, but also even when I was curating, the Latin American Film Week and so on, we do try to highlight voices that we feel like need highlighting, that need to be talked about, whether it's a minority, whether it's women, whether it's whatever the case may be. But women have been very, very kind of a focal point for us. And I do, when we've had our first year anniversary, we actually put together all the covers of all the film guides. So we print our film guides every single month, and we put all 12 of them together, and there were 11 women. And there was Diego Maradona. So we do make very conscious decision to highlight female character. When you enter the cinema, you are welcomed by, a woman as well, which is a massive photo of one of the first films that we showed at Cinemakula in our opening. And we do feel like it is important to represent those female voices because it doesn't happen enough. So it does need to be a conscious effort.
Yeah.
I feel.
Would you say that it doesn't happen enough in the movie industry in general or the Middle East?
I mean, come on, the Me Too movement.
Yeah,
that's in itself. I think the past year we've seen, enough proof points around the world of how this misogyny actually, permeates in the entire industry at so many levels. I actually think in the Arab world, there's always this discussion that we have, at film festivals and in different platforms about, the sort of the dire state of, of Arab women, in the industry. And I think that's a misconception because we actually have a far greater representation of directors, female voices, producers in the Arab world. And obviously the ratio of production is a different, metric. But, there's a very strong presence of the Arab female voice in contemporary independent filmmaking across the entire region from the Middle East and North Africa. So that's something that, we're very proud of. And what we feel is underrepresented is the visibility around that, is the awareness around, what that looks like. And also the showcase of the films at the very, base level. There aren't cinemas that are showing those films. There aren't cinemas that are giving voice to, and not to voice to the voiceless, but voice to the voices, And I think that's something that we took on very, very strongly. And, also fundamentally across not just the region, it's something that we thought, was a different kind of contribution that we wanted to make, not just to jump on the bandwagon of the conversation around women, but also, to bring a different perspective, a different kind of wisdom, through the films that we show. So whether it's, Ruth Bader Ginsburg documentary, the RBG film, or Munir Farman Farmayan, the late Munir Farman Farmayan, the Iranian artist by, Bahman Kiarostami, or, tons of films. I mean, there's a whole range of films that we've done that we've, taken full force because we think it's a different kind of, outlook on life. And I think that's our contribution. It's not just showcasing Arab films.
Yeah, and I do think that also we have focused on also encouraging discourse around some of these subjects as well. So through a lot of the series that we have done that have focused on women and have focused on female issues, there has been also a discussion component where we feel like it's important for females from different places to come together and actually share their experiences as well. Not only necessarily related to discussing the film, but rather discussing the issues that are being presented on the film. So I think that is also another level of another layer of contribution that we bring into the table to the overall subject.
Speaking of contribution, I think that like all of us agree that when we go to movie theater here in Dubai, we kind of like realize that some scenes are cut. Right? You take a bolder approach.
Are they? No.
Are they? I know, all of us are like, they kiss and then, they have a kids. Like, oh, what happened with it?
What kiss?
What happened?
What kiss?
Let's see. They're laughing because it's true, right?
Yeah.
So you guys, like Cinema Kill takes a bolder approach when it comes to this. And you kind of like project movies as they are intended to be watched by film directors. I mean, also, the question is why do you think this is important and how do you go about it remaining culturally sensible?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I feel like I need to bring my my boxing gloves for this
Speaking about
one.
censorship, right?
Yeah, censorship. It's like, you're from the Arab world, you're from the Middle East, you operate here, it's going to come up, and it is a reality. It is something that we have to reckon with, in the selection process and the curatorial process, but, all the way through. And all the way until the film ends, when the credits roll, that's the only moment we can be like, okay, that went well. That was okay. So it is something that's part of our reality, and I think, the one thing that we're conscious of is that we're playing the long game out here. We don't want this to be a short-lived legacy of victory and then kaput. We don't want this to be another Dubai phenomenon. We want to be here for a while, and what that means is that we have to think about the kinds of films that we show. And the beauty about cinema and the world of film is that there's a lot to be shown. And the devastating reality here is that you don't have access to a lot of those films. So we have an entire universe that we can tap into that doesn't necessarily trigger the same sorts of reactions that you would be confronting head on if you select only a certain gamut of films. So that there's an element of self correction that happens in the curatorial process. By the same token, we also, play a much more interactive role with the censors. We work very closely with the National Media Council, and we take the time, unlike a lot of, distributors and rights holders and theaters here, we're invested in the editorial, voice. We're invested in the films. We're invested in the artists, and we have a very strong relationship with the artists often. So we make the effort in campaigning, to keep the films as they were intended to be shown. So we spend a lot of time defending films. We spend a lot of time fighting. Sometimes it's ugly, sometimes it's it's inexplicable also, and the parameters are also very loose. But the other thing that's happening is that we're reaping the benefits of 14 years of the Dubai Film Festival. We're reaping the benefits of a more progressive view at the National Media Council that is a little bit more lenient and is looking to progress in its take on cinema. So I think there are a lot of different things that are happening that are helping the way that we're approaching, our films. And there's a larger growing conversation around the arts, the opening of NYU Abu Dhabi, the opening of the Louvre. All of these different things, kind of pool into the micro, sort of details of what we're doing. And, whether a film like Cold War, will pass or not, whether we can show a film like Leaving Neverland 10 years ago. That would never happen.
Out of the question.
That would never happen.
Yeah, out of the question. Yeah, now there is definitely a lot more flexibility. And there is also, I feel like it's also because there is a lot more willingness from the audience to accept as well. So I think that has a lot of repercussion on the changes that we're seeing and on the shifting kind of nature of not only the authorities but also of the exhibitors at the same time. So for us, I think it's always been very important to screen the films as the way that they were definitely intended to.
The one thing I will say, just to be completely transparent, is that we have very few moments had to make the decision of removing a film from a program because we were asked to cut certain scenes. So we'd rather not show a film and then cut it. The only times we've actually ever cut a film is when the director at that moment himself approved the cut that we were asked to make. And we had to have that direct conversation. Do you prefer that? We are okay with canceling the screening because we'd rather not touch your film. But if you're okay with it and you still want it to be shown here, then it's your call to make. And, in that case, he was open to doing it.
It's very interesting when you have like a bunch of people in front of you and say, hey, you know what? We're not screening anymore. And what do people do? They go home, they probably open Netflix, and this leads me to my next question. And
we don't do it then. We don't do it right then, though. We make the decision very early on before people get there.
Yeah, I can imagine. But speaking of Netflix and YouTube, and like there are many other platforms that today they make original, and there is like very great content out there. So the question here is, how do you stay relevant to the audience that in some ways like is overflowed by high quality content and also from the comfort of their house, from their houses? How do you go about this?
I think that also goes back to Butheina's point earlier on this need for connection and this need to this shared experience. I do think that we kind of tap into a very different emotional kind of desire to share an experience together and to also have that discourse after that we talked about. I do think that, of course, VOD platforms like everything else have their place. And I mean, I myself spend hours watching Netflix and seeing different things for content. But at the same time, I do think that there is quite a magic in projection. There is quite a magic in that shared moment when you're all laughing together or crying together on the same scene. We saw it with so many different films. I mean, we have also shown documentaries and feature films that have already been out in a lot of VOD platforms for months, and people still come to see it at the cinema because there is some work that is meant to be seen in that kind of grandiose way, which only cinemas can adapt to. And we do bring a different environment that will allow for that magical connection to happen, not only with the film and not only with that reflectiveness of watching it in a darkness together, but also the ability to have a conversation afterwards with the person next to you and say, okay, what did you think about this? And we've seen that.
The actual experience of going to cinemas around the world, is asking that question. What are the things that bring people out of their homes, out of their own control, to the surrender of a selected film, to the specific curatorial voice? And I think that's the other thing that we do that's different than a multiplex, or your conventional cinemas. There is a curatorial voice. There's an actual, sort of value system. Or multiple value systems that we try to plug in. There's questions. There's a line. There's a voice. There's a certain kind of presentation of films that our audiences trust us to bring. So sometimes it doesn't really matter. Whereas, going and trying to chase a specific film or stumbling upon a theater, or what do we do, in Dubai on a Thursday night, when you have nothing else to do and you don't want to go out, we're not the recipients of that life cycle.
Right.
So there's a very different sort of relationship that we're addressing.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Speaking of voices, if you don't mind, I'm gonna maybe open up the to the audience here. Who has the first question? Yes.
So I'm curious to get your take on and you guys personally, on the superhero versus, independent artistic film battle that's kind of happening right now. There have been a lot of comments, back and forth between some of the bigger directors out there. So what are your guys' thoughts?
Well, I love superhero films myself, personally. I do go to the multiplex to watch superhero films. I think there is an important place for that, and I think that it has a very important place already in the multiplex. I do think that some of the bigger kind of blockbuster titles does overshadow a lot of the independent work that is being made. And I think that that's why, places like ours are so important in the landscape of cinema. It's because we do bring that attention to those films that are currently not slotted in the best slots, not and are kind of being taken over by the Marvel films and so on and so forth. But I do think that there is definitely a place for both. I mean, there is one thing to go to the cinema for entertainment and to sit and kind of that escapism that Butheina was referring to. And then there is a very different experience to going to the cinema and watching a film that is going to challenge the views that you have on different subjects in the world or different value systems and so on. I think that the two are very different, but that there should be a space for both. And that's my personal take on that.
Yeah, I mean, we always have this conversation of, Marvel versus Scorsese, and it's like, to me, it's like comparing apples to a Venus flytrap, like it's a very different thing, because the departure points are different, and I think from an industry standpoint, cinema is experiencing, a bit of a shift, in terms of the, whether it's the era of the remake or it's, the franchise sort of landscape that overpowers everything else. There's almost like a dearth, of good storytelling that you can actually access. And I think that's contributing to the growth of another industry, the sort of, the series and all the originals and all that stuff. And I think that, also has a very interesting kind of extension of what the cinema universe used to do. So, you're seeing some of the best, television, shows and series that have ever been made, and I think that's an interesting shift, and it's something we have to think about, as in terms of the formats that we showcase. But, I think the departure point of a commercial production or, a large, franchise film is ultimately, box office, is ultimately, kind of squeezing every possible, and sometimes squeezing it, masterfully, and sometimes, coming up with a film
like
as
Joker.
Like the Joker. Everybody's talking about the Joker,
Everybody's talking about the Joker.
But you would have never had the Joker. You would have never had a film like Black Panther had there not been an entire universe of cinema to draw from.
Sure. Yes.
The Joker jumps on the back of, of whether it's, King of Comedy or Taxi Driver, or even Joaquin Phoenix's previous film, like, Lynn Ramsey's You Were Never Really Here. That gave birth to what we finally saw. It wasn't just this masterpiece that that came out of nowhere. Black Panther also, as a wide kind of bastion, of the messages that have been slowly, seeded through, efforts of African American filmmakers in the past 15 years, of the resurgence of campaigns that have insisted on integration of people of color, of cultural accuracy, of fight against cultural, appropriation. And that gave birth to the mastery and the considerations that ended up with, something as, as colorful, as far-reaching as Black Panther. So I think that they kind of, they have this, love-hate, relationship, but they ultimately stem from the very different spaces. But, our role, and that's something we always talk about is, do we go into a new market? There's all this talk about Saudi, there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of filmmakers there. I believe in the Saudi, filmmaker story, but I think you need to have something to push back against when you're presenting an alternative, and I think, that's the role of independent cinema, is to have this pushback, is to have this, this fight. Because that's where, healthier, conscious kind of absorption of the kinds of films that we show comes to life. So
bottom line, we need both. We need
both. We need less of some.
Yeah, we absolutely less of some.
Yeah.
Less of some. Second question. Elisa?
So you were saying, is there any idea that came out of the process of listening to them or giving voice to them?
Absolutely. Yeah? I mean, how do we listen to them? Well, I do think that one of the things that I'm very proud of, and I think what makes it very different as well from a multiplex, is that we do have a very personable relationship with our audience. I spend pretty much most of my time at the cinema, and I do know a lot of the audience myself on a personal level, particularly the people that come on a very regular basis. I'm very familiar with who they are as people. They're people that have become my friends out of coming to the cinema. So I do think that we have that relationship where audiences also feel comfortable telling us what they would like to see on the screen and requesting what they would like to see on the screen. I think that the Latin American Film Festival, or the next year we're also doing a Spanish Film Week, and we are giving kind of a little bit more of a focus on, Spanish-speaking cinema, is because we got that kind of request, and we felt like there was that voice that was not being represented even through us. So there are different ways that we interact with the audience that allows us to test programming as well. And I think that it's also something that we ourselves talk about a lot, about what are the things, or what are the films that we could show that can also bring a new type of public into the cinema. What are the new collaborations that we can have that can explore different audiences? I still think that we're not even scratching the surface in terms of audience. I think that there is a lot more room to kind of explore different sides of programming to bring in more people. But we do still try to do different things and to explore different things in terms of documentary, in terms of animation, in terms of all the different genres that we have shown at the cinema.
Yeah, and I think there's another element of being in a city like Dubai, where you have, everybody talks about diversity and the 200 nationalities, and we all love to throw that that sort of that slogan around, and it's great. Yes, it is a reality of the place we're in, but I think there's a way in which that can also be very isolated. And I think the thing that we've learned throughout this journey is that people also gravitate towards feeling heard, and feeling seen. And a lot of what our films do, and bringing cinema of certain communities, or whether it's through a nationalistic sort of framework, focusing on a specific country or a geography, pride point of a particular country. Like, for example, Kafar Nahom was a good example. When we released that film, everybody was loving the idea that Nadine Labaki was getting all this attention, well deserved. And the moment we opened it, it was our entire audience, 90% of it was Lebanese. Now we are running a film called Papisha, which is a very strong feminist coming of age story set in Algeria during the Black Decade. It premiered at Cannes in May, and we brought it here, and it was our audiences have been very strongly, very proudly, very visibly Algerian. And I think there's a lot of that happening. There's other forms of rallying around interest groups and other metadata that brings people out to the kinds of thematics that we explore. Like Soul DXB, for example, targets a very specific type of community. People interested in sneaker culture or hip hop or urban sort of lifestyle and so on. So that's the interest group. So there's that kind of listening. But even going back to the thinking around the space, that was a lot of the learning throughout our pop-up experiences, because we had a lot of different forms, of designing cinemas, and we had very different dreams of what this art house would look like, reference points. I spent some time in Berlin and there's a ton of art houses, in that city, which is beautiful, but, ultimately what doing the pop-ups told us, is a lot of information about the specificity of this place. So even the way that we ended up designing, the experience, the choice of couches, it wasn't just low budget, that ended up giving us the solutions that we had to work with, It was actually the informality that people craved, because, you are surrounded by perfection. There's this sort of, almost like, a sanitized, experience of life.
Sanitary experience, yeah.
So we wanted something that would slightly disrupt that, give you a little bit of that ugly, something that is comfortable, that is human.
And that warmth as well.
So that's in terms of the spatial experience. Even our concessions was responsive to, what people were telling us we're excited about. And we did this experiment in between the pop-ups where we were traveling with the cinema and opening the final space, which was in the summer of 2017. For 2.5 months, we ran something called Cinema Kiel Beta, or Now Playing. And we ran the cinema every single night the same way that we would here, with a lower ticket price. Not a single nail drilled into the wall. Everything was makeshift.
Exactly.
We had acoustic curtains as walls. We had, wallpaper, which still is our wallpaper now, our famous wallpaper. But we had donated furniture, was very eclectic. And we ran it. And that became the best, sort of pilot or stress test to, what we ended up with. So that kind of listening also informs the decision making around the experience and designing the experience.
Yeah, we initially had something completely different in mind of of what the cinema was going to be. And it was because of that beta period and the way that people reacted to our takeover of that warehouse, which is still the warehouse that we're in now, that really informed our decision that made us realize that people were actually seeking that informality and that living room feel that really made people feel comfortable at Cinema Akil, and that they made it made it more warmer, and that experience was not very common here. So we felt like we wanted to have a cinema that was true to Dubai, but at the same time that would challenge a lot of the kind of the notions of what you think Dubai is coming in fresh. So yeah.
How wonderful is it? Like you two, like you don't even need anybody to ask you questions, just like compliment each other. It's like exponential. Thank you. I have one last question from my side. You mentioned before Saudi. Everybody's looking into it. Maybe it's not for yours, like for you, but what's the future of Cinema Akil? Are you moving to Saudi? Are you opening spaces in Abu Dhabi? Are you opening in some other cities in Europe? What do you think this space is going to become in the future?
I mean, I think the future is precarious, for cinema at large. Our hope is to continue. It's our first year, and our hope is to really get, even better at what we do, present even more critical programming, be a home, be really that home and be discovered by everybody that's seeking, whatever it is that we're putting out there, whatever our value systems are. And then, a possibility for collaborations are always things that we look out for. I mean, we're part of the network of Arab Art House Screens, which is a network of cinemas across the region, from Morocco to Khartoum to Cairo, Beirut, and we're constantly collaborating with each other on programming and also challenging each other in terms of the specificity of our context. So we're really hoping to see that grow. And if Saudi, is a window and we find the right kind of space for it, then absolutely. I think, there always is room for some localized manifestation. And I think that's the other thing, is that we don't want to become a chain or a franchise or even a model, because it's a very specifically Dubai Alco's version that you're seeing when you come there.
Exactly.
And I think that's the other thing about Dubai, is that there is a lot of this catapulting, there is a lot of this parachuting of concepts as they should be. And that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to be something that is invested in this place, and and if there are other places that we can invest in, then we'll go through the same sort of critical life cycle and hopefully interrogate that further.
Thank you.